This is going to be a fascinating panel, at least for me, and I'm sure for all of you, about food insecurity. And I'm Jordan Schnitzer, and help with the museum here a bit, and the current exhibition, Art of Food. It's a perfect way to have a discussion about some of the amazing themes that the 40 artists in the exhibition in there that I hope you've all seen talk about. So with that, we're delighted that you're all here. And when Olivia Miller, from the director of the Art Museum at the University of Arizona campus, came up with this theme of Art of Food, I thought it was really brilliant because of all the different facets of food. First, the huge emphasis today about what we eat and what goes into our bodies, the farm to table. Are we aware of all the chemicals, processed food, and so forth? Second, the way the biggest artists from time immemorial, in fact, every artist has always used food in their work. And third, facing the issue of food insecurity and the crisis around the world of literally hundreds of millions of people that aren't as fortunate as many of us that are able to eat every day. So with that, I'm introducing Mary Lecoq, who's going to be the moderator for the panel, and we're going to hear about food insecurity and what's happening on this campus and maybe around the world. Thank you.
So before we get started, Washington State University would like to acknowledge that its locations statewide are on homelands of Native peoples. We have lived in this region from time immemorial, and there are 37 recognized tribes that share their traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington State. Some of these are nations and confederations that represent multiple tribes and bands. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original and current caretakers of the region. We acknowledge that the dispossession of indigenous lands was often taken by coercive and violent acts and disregard of treaties. For that, we extend our deepest apologies. We owe our deepest gratitude to the Native peoples of this region and maintain our commitment towards reconciliation. So, welcome to our panel. We're going to be talking about food insecurity. Let me introduce our panelists for today. We have Sandra Alvarez. She is the AmeriCorps Campus Food Resource Coordinator at the Cougar Food Pantry. A senior at Washington State University, she studies human development across the lifespan and is committed to helping students meet their basic needs so they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. Sandra understands the challenges students face because she's been there herself. She is careful to make sure her work supports students' well-being with the hope that she can help students succeed, thrive, and ultimately contribute to the betterment of the communities and the world. Next to her, we have Andrew Lusader. He is an undergraduate in medical and social sciences, a research assistant at WSU. His research examines the intersection of biological and social systems on health, using public health approaches and techniques. His work seeks to understand and interplay the biological and social systems on health with the goal of defining, understanding, and implementing various approaches to modern public health issues. Andrew is a member of the American Public Health Association. Next to him, we have Claire McPherson. Claire served in the Community Action Center's Community Food Bank Gardener for the past 3 years. She is responsible for managing the CAC's food bank garden plots, running the hydroponic systems, and hosting several program events, including the annual plant sale, seed swap, and community garden tours. With the help of volunteers, the garden program produces over 1,000 pounds of fresh produce every year to share with the Palouse community. Additionally, Claire coordinates and teaches various garden education classes throughout the year to help community members learn how to grow their own food. And finally, down there at the end, we have Dina Bayumi. Dina has been the coordinator of the mobile farm stand for the Community Action Center of Whitman County since October 2022. She focuses on increasing access to healthy, locally grown food in rural communities throughout the Palouse region. As coordinator, Dina works closely with rural residents, small-scale farmers, community groups, and local government to develop collaborative, community-driven methods to ensure food security. She has previously worked with the Pullman School Pantries program while completing her PhD in public affairs. Dina has been involved in several research projects that center on the impact of collaboration and of collaborative network relationships on developing innovative policy solutions. That's our panel. So we're just going to kind of go down the line and start with Sandra. Can you tell us kind of what you do and how it is involved with food insecurity?
I would love to. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Mary. So I work directly with the students inside of the Cougar Food Pantry. We foster a sense of community there. It's not just about handing food. We strive to make sure every student feels included and is met with kindness. I made it a mission of mine to make sure the space is welcoming and people can go in with dignity. It's a clean space. It's got all 5 food groups, and there are multiple choices of healthy food items to choose from. We do a lot there. We wear many hats, and I'm grateful to be here working at the Cougar Food Pantry.
Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about your work and how it is corresponds with food insecurity?
Absolutely. So I work with several professors here on the WSU campus, including Dr. Sarah Whitley, Dr. Julie Kamak, and previously Dr. Caroline Owens on issues of food insecurity and student basic needs. We work very closely with the Center for Civic Engagement and Mary LaCoy, looking at policy evaluations and designing interventions for food insecurity that are upstream versus downstream. I've also worked as a liaison between the food pantry here at WSU and state partners from the University of Washington all the way to Western and all of our sister campuses, including Tri-Cities and Vancouver.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And Claire, what is the work that you are currently doing, and how does it engage with food insecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the food bank gardener for Community Action Center, my role is growing food throughout the year to supply our food bank and the mobile farm stand with fresh produce. If you're not familiar with Community Action Center, among many other programs, we have a food bank that is open to anyone, but primarily residents of Whitman County. We're serving nearly 1,000 families a month, and we are always striving to have fresh produce available in the food bank. So the garden program is supplementing that along with the food that we're purchasing from farmers. So we are running a hydroponic system that grows mostly lettuce indoors year-round, and then we have some community garden plots that are growing other types of outdoor produce and different education programs to help teach community members how they could do some of their own food growing at home.
Fantastic. And Dina, would you like to tell us more about your work?
Yeah, so the mobile farm stand really focuses on increasing access, particularly among rural residents that are living outside of Pullman. However, we do serve the Pullman area. These small communities are often up to an hour away from a grocery store or farmer's market. And there are high levels of food insecurity outside of the city as well. And so the mobile farm stand, working with local farmers, purchases seasonal fruits and vegetables, and we take our van and distribute it in different towns. We have a set schedule where we visit these communities every other week. And essentially set up a pop-up farmers market, and it becomes really a community hub where people come and exchange recipes while getting fruits and vegetables that they normally wouldn't be able to get, even at their local store. And, you know, it's really a community-centered program out of Community Action Center.
Thank you so much. So I'd love to hear from any of you. What are some trends or themes that you're seeing in food insecurity on WSU campus and the larger community?
I didn't hear the first part.
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I would love to hear any trends or information you have on current needs of WSU and the larger community.
I think it's pretty obvious that food insecurity is increasing quite a bit, and has been increasing since 2020. I know that the number of residents that I see at each mobile farm stand has increased about 68% from a year ago. And I think that is directly linked to the rate of inflation and the high cost of food currently. I don't think that it's any different among students. I have worked with Mary with different events, and we got a large number of, I guess what you would call non-traditional students, but who are very, very interested in getting fresh food or food in general. We recently had an event in conjunction with the Vet Med, and I have never seen so many students come and get food so quickly. I mean, we were completely emptied out in 20 minutes. So that's kind of a long answer of saying it's increasing.
Yeah, to add to that, the students that we see in our pantry, our space can only fit so many people, and the influx of students that are coming in, we can't accommodate that. We find that there's long lines that wrap around into the Terrell Library, and we hope that everyone is able to pick up what they need while they're in the pantry with us.
So a couple other general themes that we tend to see when it comes to food insecurity is the prevalency of food insecurity on university campuses nationally isn't very well understood or known. The most common measure is the USDA Food Insecurity Survey Module, which is kind of a standardized tool that is used both on university campuses, but in general when it comes to measuring food insecurity. Unfortunately, the tool is designed with people who have traditional economic backgrounds, meaning that they have a monthly income from a job. They aren't getting financial aid from the university or things of that nature, or they live in a family unit rather than living in a dorm or individualized. So because of this, food insecurity is measured anywhere from 12% all the way up to 50% of college students. And it then ranges at whether or not you're at a public institution or private institution, how their financial systems are set up and things of that nature. Additionally, when it comes to what we were talking about when it comes to marginalized backgrounds and things like that, there has been several studies that have shown that food insecurity affects those who come from untraditional backgrounds, low-income students, graduate students, and from historically minoritized student bodies as well. So as we become more diverse in our student body here at WSU and other campuses, we are starting to see the issues that we see system-wide and nationally and outside of the university on the university as well.
So can you give us some examples or ways that legislature or policies could improve food insecurity?
Yeah, it does.
So that's actually a really hard question. So there have been policies that the Washington State Legislature has put out just recently, including the basic needs for post-secondary education that created a basic needs navigator on all public institutions here in the state. The program is in its pilot, so the actual efficiency and whether or not it's working is yet to be known. Even more concerning is that when we then are measuring its effectiveness, we don't have measures that work for college students. So the USDA FSM, which was used to essentially assess the prevalency and then create the grant based on the need, is flawed. And so using it to assess whether or not a program is working may not be the most efficient way. So it's a matter of needing to create new tools and then evaluating pre-existing policies.
I agree with you. I think the definition of what a traditional college student is no longer the kind of 18-year-old student who has just come from a family, a traditional family background, who is a freshman, who is dependent on their parents. I think that has changed quite a bit. That's not even the majority of students on college campuses anymore. And I think that the tools and the policies have to reflect that changing demographic of what a student is. But I think one thing that that comes to mind, the Farm Bill is at the federal level currently being debated, and within the Farm Bill, they actually set the standards of how much people get in benefits through SNAP, which is what was formerly called food stamps. That's something that's still up for debate and something that people can contact their representatives and ask them to support higher definitions for, I'm not sure how to define it. So to maintain a steady increase in the amount of money that gets distributed through SNAP, to at least make it in line with inflation and increasing costs.
Yeah, that is definitely a great point in reference to our food bank. We're not necessarily keeping track of who is a student. We have that information, but we're not asking everyone that comes in, so we're serving students and the general population. But it is a consistent comment from our clients that they just don't have enough food bank stamps, or their SNAP card is just not going as far as it used to. So they're using our food bank services more, and we are still having to limit services more because we have more clients. So I definitely agree with Dina that increasing those funding so people have the ability to use the funds at grocery stores and use the food bank as a supplement rather than their primary food source.
And then outside of the general public, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP, isn't open to all students. There are barriers in the way of students accessing this resource because they have to meet certain work requirements or certain demographic requirements to be able to use SNAP. And then those students who even may qualify may not know that they qualify, or they may not know how to fill out the application. And there's so many barriers to SNAP that need to be improved to make it more efficient for university students.
So what are some other barriers besides maybe not having access that you see people having in their ability to get food?
So the one thing we need to consider is that food insecurity is only one metric by which we can understand economic disadvantage. Food insecurity is a measure of material hardship. So what normally goes hand in hand with food insecurity is things like housing insecurity. They may not be able to afford clothing, and there may be numerous other ways that we can measure this material hardship. And so those who may be food insecure may not have access to transportation to go to the grocery store. They may also not know what food insecurity is. They may be living with an experience that they don't have a word for. And so it's tackling the issue of food insecurity holistically with all the issues of material hardship and making sure that we provide awareness that people know that it exists and how they can find resources.
Well said. I feel another barrier could be that sometimes when we, as students, want to go into a food bank or the Cougar Food Pantry, the hours don't often align with the schedules of these students. So we'll have a student that's on campus 12 hours a day doing research classes, working, and we're closed, or Community Action Center might be unavailable at the time. I've experienced that myself, and it's something to consider moving forward.
With the idea of hours as well, there are also infrastructure issues when it comes to food insecurity. Not all university campuses are as blessed as we are to have an entire pantry. So for example, the Vancouver campus, they can't just go in and pick up food. They have to submit a request. Not all campuses have the same extent of resources within their food pantry that we do here. And that's not to say that we here have everything that we need as well. We have storage capacity issues when it comes to receiving donations that we can't accommodate for. There are certain items within the food pantry we have a hard time acquiring because they're not donated at a high rate. So there are some infrastructure issues as well.
To add to that, also staffing capacity. We'll run into some grocery store might offer to pick up, let's say, 50 pounds of soup. If our staff isn't available, then we're not able to pick up that food, and it creates a further barrier for us as well.
I would add as well that another barrier is not everyone knowing how to use the food that a food bank might offer. Oftentimes, our food bank is stocked with just pantry staples, rice, beans, canned veggies. It's less common that we're getting the ready-to-eat foods, things that you can put right in a microwave or an oven. And if your families or students don't understand how to cook with the food that we have, it's not available to them. That is just a waste of food that they won't be able to eat.
Yeah, that's a major one.
Yeah, I would say that goes in line with not necessarily having culturally relevant foods that non-native students know how to prepare or are used to. Oftentimes, they have come from backgrounds or more accustomed to having fresh food markets where you visit it once a day or once every other day. And so coming to the United States oftentimes can be a big culture shock when you go to a food bank and everything is canned or boxed or powdered in multiple colors. And I think that can be a barrier.
I think that touches on a really good idea of the definition of food insecurity. We frequently think of food insecurity as a lack of food. However, it can be more complicated than that in this idea of nutrition insecurity. They may have food, but it may not be healthy or healthy or good food for them. And so it's this idea that they are intertwined. They both exist simultaneously, and we can't think of them independently. And so I think that really touches on a great idea that food insecurity's definition needs to change.
As far as solutions, some ways Food Rescue can work to bridge that gap is offering nutrition education, using those foods that are hard to use, utilizing social media to your advantage. At least with our students, we know that they are on social media. Our demographic is there, and so meeting them where they're at and posting content that is relevant for them to learn about the foods and how to eat them, how to prepare them, benefits them as well as our shelves. We can rotate food, we can get more food, and that's our goal this year in the pantry, is to increase our social media awareness of how to make food, how to prepare food, and to destigmatize any ideas people may have about going to a food pantry.
To build off that, actually, there are some really interesting conversations around strategic communication with the student body. Right now, the university and most universities compartmentalize pretty aggressively. So for example, Cougar Health Services is an independent organization from the Cougar Food Pantry. And so their messaging may be entirely different than what our messaging is. So the goal is to kind of come together and make sure all of our messaging is universal, it is the same, it is accurate, and it is efficient in communicating what we want it to.
That tendency to kind of silo isn't, just reserved for the university. I really think that there can be a lot done with organizations collaborating and providing kind of wraparound services. Because as you said before, food insecurity is very rarely just food insecurity. It includes childcare, transportation, housing, technology. So really different organizations within the university, departments within the university, as well as outside of the university, kind of approaching it all together, like you said, holistically.
Can you come up with any other solutions or things that you can think of that would maybe help to mitigate the barriers and improve basic needs and security in general?
That's a really hard question because the solutions require so many things. It requires state level policy change, institutional policy change. It requires funding. It requires initiatives. It requires just the idea of what we can do. My biggest thing would be an upstream intervention. So tackling food insecurity before it arises, making sure students have the resources and the knowledge to budget properly so that they have their financial aid the entire semester, make sure that they know how to cook the staples that are available in a food pantry and things of that nature. So it's about being proactive rather than reactive, and that's kind of where our social safety nets as both an institution and as a country are. We tend to be very reactive rather than proactive.
If you could tell everybody one thing that would surprise them about food insecurity, what would it be?
It's a great question. Let me gather my thoughts. One thing?
And you can go with multiple. Nobody agrees on anything, whether it's the prevalency, whether it's how to address it, whether it's what kind of funding is required. Nobody agrees on anything, whether it be the UW, us, Western, University of California, Iowa, Florida, nobody agrees. We all have different ideas, and we don't know what works yet. We just really don't.
I know for me, one of the first things that really surprised me when I was working in food banking was how important can openers are. So, I mean, if there's anything, you don't even think about the fact that we're giving people all these cans of food and there's no way to open them, then they can't really eat it. Is there anything like that you can think of?
I would say one of the biggest surprises for me in working in food banks is just the volatility of food insecurity. It's not constant. We're not seeing the same faces all the time. Sometimes people will have the food they need for months on end, and then something changes, and they're back at the food bank, and it's just constant changes in who we're serving. It's not the same people every single week using our services. It really fluctuates throughout the year.
I want to bring up senior nutrition. It's not something we directly work with at the Cougar Food Pantry. Speaking more broadly, that seniors are often forgotten. There are seniors in our community and beyond in the world who have disabilities where they cannot go to the grocery store and they cannot do what an able-bodied person can do. And so they're often left with no relatives. And so they depend on organizations like ours to lean in and get food. Meals on Wheels is one of my favorite nonprofits that works with seniors. They deliver meals directly to those individuals who may need that.
That actually touches on a great idea. There are a lot of groups of people nationally who are forgotten about when it comes to issues of food insecurity. So we're here talking from a university. However, there are places where food deserts exist, where they cannot access food because there is no food in their given environment, or there's not healthy food. And this exists in a lot of our urban centers, so like Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, Seattle. And it's hard to assess how they exist because we can define a food desert in so many different ways. We can talk about it in the built environment where there's not a physical grocery store. We can talk about it in an economic sense. For example, here in Layton, Whitman County, outside of Pullman and Moscow. Wow, really lost me there. Pullman and Moscow, we see there is a really big issue with poverty in this region.
It's in Pullman too, though.
Yeah.
A
Yes, it does.
big chunk of Pullman.
I feel like that relates to a lot of the students being here, though.
It's adjusted for students. They've changed it.
Oh, okay. Well, so long story short, there's a lot of economic issues that we can assess, built environment issues we can assess, education too. There are a lot of areas where education is not adequate to give people what they need to when they go into being an adult. And so there's a lot of things that we need to address systematically across the board.
Okay, Dina, I want to hear more about these changes that they've made and about food insecurity and poverty levels in the area.
You want me to give you the statistical background?
I mean, go for it. Give us some statistics.
So they have acknowledged the fact that communities with a university or a college have higher levels of poverty and measures like food insecurity, among other things. So they have adjusted and modified the questioning in the American Community Survey so that they are able to determine which of the people responding is a dependent. So they have parents who are taking care of them, and which of the students are actually independent and living on their own, using their own wages. So,
Do you know if they've adjusted the U.S. Census?
I'm sorry?
The U.S. Census?
What about it?
Did they adjust it at all for that?
I mean, the American Community Survey is part of the census, but it's done, they have projections that they come out with every year. And I think that the data is gathered, so it's smaller scale and it's gathered like every 2 years or every 3 years. And the census is every 10 years, which is much more thorough. I honestly don't know, sorry.
I don't believe that was in your bio that you're a census expert, so we'll forgive you. So what about some stereotypes that you would like to bust when it comes to poverty and food insecurity?
Someone else needs it more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's false. Everyone needs food. Everyone.
You must have not worked hard enough, and that's why you need to rely on food provided by other people or benefits provided by the government.
I think that's a really good one. They've shown that people who are in poverty are actually working harder, longer hours, and more jobs than people who are of higher socioeconomic status.
I think this is a really great time to talk about this idea of meritocracy, this idea that your merit will determine what you achieve in this life. However, there are a lot of social things that may define that. You may be how you're raised economically. Were you in a lower class or a higher class? Where you grew up, were you in an area that didn't have certain things or versus places that did? So we need to understand that, yes, there is an idea that the work you do does contribute to it, but there's also this idea that the place you were born, live, work, and play affect it just as much.
I think it's my own opinion. I think it's fair to say that food insecurity, along with a lot of metrics of poverty, is very much a systemic issue, and it's a social justice issue. So there are inherently systemic kind of institutional ways that people have a harder time and have to overcome larger challenges in order to maintain a kind of steady lifestyle where they don't have to worry about what if my car breaks down? What if my washing machine no longer works and I have to replace it? Things like that. Will I be able to, provide lunch for my kids while also having a lunch for myself?
I really like that idea of social justice. Education tends to be one of the trademarks and one of the markers of lifelong health and financial well-being. And so when we talk about education and we talk about this idea of accessibility to education, we have to talk about material insecurity. And like we spoke about towards the beginning of this, we see a lot of disparities among different groups of our student body. Those of low income, those of minority, those of graduate students, and those of historically marginalized backgrounds are often more food insecure than their peers. And as a measure of food insecurity, that is a measure of material hardship. And so because of that, it makes food insecurity and material hardship not just an issue of a student body or an individual, but an issue of equality and accessibility. And that is something that I would really love all of you to take away. It's a matter of equality.
So, oh, sorry.
Oh, I just said well said.
Oh. So I guess let's finish up kind of here with what can we do? This sounds like a huge problem. There's lots of things that need to be done, but what could we do in this room, just everyday people, to help with this problem?
Volunteer. Yeah, volunteering efforts, they go such a long way. And you can volunteer in a variety of different ways. You can bring your expertise to the table, helping younger nonprofits up off the ground. If you're an accountant, you can help with budgeting. I'm not sure what accountants do, I apologize. It just came to my mind. But social media, if you're a social media marketer, advertiser, contributing to your community in that sense, yeah, getting involved in your community is something I learned here working at the CCE, Center for Civic Engagement. Service learning is great, and I'm grateful that we've had this opportunity at WSU to do this.
So just by being here and being engaged in this conversation and this dialogue, you are already contributing to this issue. We just need to have the conversations. We need to get the parties who can help make these changes that we need to be engaged with this conversation. And that's a huge thing that we would love to have happen.
Yeah, I would say donating resources and time directly to the organizations in your community. Find the organization that is doing the work that is interesting to you or you think is the most impactful, and donating whatever resources or time that you have, or whether it be financial, but really looking for the organizations that you think are doing the work that you want to be involved in.
I think these are all great answers. I guess if I were to think of one thing, it would, well, I should step back and say that it can be very easy to be overwhelmed with a large, kind of sticky social problem like this. And for me, at least, the best thing to keep in mind is to think locally, and perhaps not worry so much on the grander scale of things, but really trying to make an impact in some small scale way, whether it's within your workplace or whether it's within your university or your community. Find out more about your local community service organizations. See how things are, you know, how politics and, I don't know, I'm kind of a policy wonk, but see what's going on in your community and just stay informed and go from there.
I would like to add, if you are social media savvy, just posting recipes of what you eat day in and day out would help so many people. I know my mom has recipes. I'm like, how did you think of that? It's so efficient. Have you guys ever had ceviche? Yes, she introduced me to a affordable recipe. It's canned tuna ceviche. So you squeeze lime and add all the pico de gallo ingredients. It's very delicious. I encourage you to try it. But it's just, you can do your part in just sharing about yourself, sharing your story. Being on social media can be, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but even just posting a recipe of your grandmother or a relative, just something you like. I think the people you're going to impact the most are your close circle. I know my close circle impacts me the most. Consider them your influencers, I suppose.
So are there any questions in the audience?
First, I have a, well, okay. First, a comment about the sort of looking at the problem upstream. One of the things that seems to me about college food insecurity, in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime, the weight of cost of attendance has shifted so dramatically. My older sister was an undergraduate here at WSU, could pay her entire tuition bill working part-time at the radio station. We are just in a different landscape about who is paying for college and what our sort of common ground sense that we as a society have an interest in helping students go to college. And the weight that it falls on families and on individuals to pay for college now puts people who we don't necessarily, I think about being in economic hardship levels, puts them in that. By the time they've paid for the cost of attendance and for books and housing and so on, what is there to give? It is a food budget often. So I think there are big issues about policy, about how we fund education and how we think about education as a common good that is part of the issue here. And I'll just say for myself, I've worked here at the university for over 25 years. I did not know until this last summer, and I'm appalled to have not known the level of food insecurity among our students. And for instance, like what the level of food provision is if you choose the lowest food plan with residence halls. I had no idea how little that covers. So one of the question is, I have a question about usage rates and about what the procedure is for students who want to use the Cougar Food Pantry. Do they have to show student ID? Is there any limit to how often or how much they can take? And what is the level of use?
I love the Cougar Pantry for this. So our model, it's a grocery store model. Students are able to walk in with their reusable bag or grocery bag, whatever they want to put food in. They're able to walk through the aisles, pick items that they want for their recipe that they're going to use for the day. Tomato sauce, for example, potatoes, onions. We're lucky, we're blessed to have fresh produce in our pantry. With limits, oftentimes we make the limits based on household size. So on average, our students are just single people, and so they're making food just for themselves. So the limits are typically one item per shelf. I'm not quite sure what that total in numbers comes out to. It's a good healthy number. And so at the end, when they're done picking out their items, they'll come up to checkout and we'll ask basic demographic questions. So they'll hand us their Cougar card, and we just look for undergrad and graduate status. We scan it and then ask how many people are in your household. And if they say four adults, no, 2 adults, 2 children, and then we specify age range. It's non-invasive, and that's my favorite part about that.
And can you talk about what the usage rates are?
Usage rates.
Like how many students would use the food pantry in a week or
Is
a
it
month? Or a year?
200? Andrew will know about that.
Yeah, so actually I pick up the ball at that point. So after they have checked out and they're gone, I then receive the data, and then I have been doing a lot of work with that. Usage is a really hard number to determine because we can look at it as how many individual students are using the pantry, but we can also look at it as how many visits are we seeing in a year. So for the circuit presentation that we presented last year, which was just a little over a year time, we had over 27,000 data points, which each data point represents 1 visit to the Cougar Food Pantry. So it's a really high number. If we're looking at individual students, it ranges depending on whether it's summer or full academic term. It's about 2,000 students around per semester, and those are unique students that are visiting.
Do you know by chance the daily number on average?
It's 121.
Okay, that's the number I was thinking.
What about the educational aspect? You mentioned recipes, for example. Do you provide, I mean, people are used to opening a can of red beans, let's say, but what about dry beans. Not
Mhm.
everybody knows how to cook them. you
Yeah.
know? So how can you, provide that sort of information, training, so that these staples can be used?
Yeah, so there are these wonderful things that we call shelf talkers or nudges. They're recipe cards that we place on the shelf or next to the shelf, where students can look at them, pick them up, take it home with them to redo that recipe. As far as dried beans, we want to make videos about how to do that. I think one of the limitations we might have is if students are living in the dorms, they don't have access to, I guess, yeah, I'm thinking through this. Well, we can make videos on how to make dried beans in the microwave. These are good thoughts to have. Yeah, so back to your question of how do we make those hard things more accessible? It's little bits at a time. What we've done in the past is we've worked with the dorms, Duncan Dunn, Stevenson, Hall. We've done nutrition education demos. In that aspect, we do hands-on recipes, so the students will work with me or a chef, and they'll do the recipe alongside them. So they'll learn safety tips, they'll learn nutritional aspects of the recipe, and they will make the recipe, which is fun. Because doing it is different than like seeing it and then forgetting about it. And that's the most fun part about this job, is being able to do nutrition education with the students.
Do you think our educational system, the elementary,
Mm-hmm.
is sort of failing our students in that way? Not,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there used to be home economics kind of things, But
Yeah.
is that kind of training
Oh,
even
okay. So
accessible or available?
as far as the educational curriculum in kinder and like secondary school, I can't say too much on that. I'm fairly far removed from that aspect. I know are you familiar with WIC? It's the Women and Infant Children's Program. That's all I am familiar with as far as children getting any nutrition education. And I'll open it up to everyone else if you know about any health education curriculum going on in our secondary schools.
So,
SNAP-Ed. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No,
Okay. That's also a really hard question because it's not universal. In secondary schools that have higher budgets, because they're in areas that are more affluent and their property tax is higher, they tend to have those type of courses because they can afford the infrastructure for it and the teachers for it and just all the things that go into that kind of thing. And then the inner city schools or the cities that aren't in as affluent areas tend to not. So we're kind of retouching on that idea of social justice and equality, in that the issues we're seeing on our campus when it comes to equality are existing prior to the university. So it's a really hard question because it's not universal.
I think that goes back to, I think we were talking about policy earlier. That is something that policy advocate groups can fight for, is a more holistic health education program that includes nutrition education. I am an advocate for that. So I'm happy that these are thoughts that are, going on throughout the community.
So Dina and Claire, I know you have some insight on these things. Do you want to add?
Locally, within the elementary schools in Pullman, for instance, there are different organizations that are providing nutrition education through SNAP-Ed, which is the educational kind of arm of SNAP. And they are kind of standardized nutrition programs that are geared specifically to a certain age group. And so it includes what used to be the food pyramid. That's from SNAP-Ed, and they've got, I think it's called My Plate. And so kids actually get to make their own kind of nutritional snack after school. So if they're involved in the Boys and Girls Club, after school they get to do that. The YMCA used to do that when it was still in existence. So there are standardized programs that are out there that have been thoroughly tested and researched that people can implement in their classroom and in their different organizations.
Yeah, there's adult programs too that SNAP-Ed puts on, and then different organizations can pick them up. Community Action Center has done programs like that in the past. You take on this curriculum, and then you can open it up to community members. Sometimes there's programs where you're taking people shopping and showing them how to shop on a budget, and then other times you're showing them how to cook with those pantry staples.
Do we have any questions from? Okay. Oh.
Hi. It's wonderful to see the people that are doing the work all in this room. I think all of us, having found this, come from a place of privilege to have found higher education. And I think the work that you do, although very impactful, how can you leverage that to make more upstream changes? Because poverty and food insecurity, in effect, is a problem that affects not only us as college students, but it's such a widespread and systemic problem in our country. What do you think maximizing your impact looks like by leveraging the information that you collect, by communicating the problems that you face through your work? Like, what can that look like?
So you hit on a really hard question. Nationally, when we look at issues of food insecurity, like I said before, they're intertwined with material insecurity, and that is all related to poverty and things of that nature. It requires an extremely holistic perspective. And so when we have, let's say, academics working on this topic, like a sociologist or an anthropologist, they tend to come to it with a very narrowed perspective. So they're going to be like, for example, sociologist is very top down, anthropologist is going to be very bottom up, versus an ecologist is going to tackle it very differently. So when we create committees to address these issues, they need to be people from diverse backgrounds. They need to be people from diverse academic disciplines. I do agree with you when you touch on the idea that we are coming from a place of privilege when talking from a university. We have an excess amount of resources. Prior to me coming to WSU, I lived in Chicago during COVID, and it was extremely hard. I was not enrolled at a university at the time. There were not the resources that exist here on this campus. And it is a systemic issue, and it's something that no one should ever have to live with, because it is an ever-consuming issue. You think about it every day, and that's all you can think about. And it is such a difficult issue because it's so tied to economics, and you have to help people find jobs, and they need to be jobs that can pay enough to afford living, and then we get into the issues of housing and how much housing costs. And so when we write policy and when we tackle these issues, I know I've said the word holistic so many times today, but it does need to be holistic. It needs to tackle every lens, every approach, every interconnected relationship, and that takes, unfortunately, a lot of people looking at it from a lot of different ways.
Being active in your community also is important in addressing those barriers, and I feel being politically engaged is a powerful tool that we can all do. And it could be as simple as, there are already groups that type out these emails to Congress or your Senate. All you have to do is click a button to subscribe, and then you send that over to your senator and your congressman. Small actions like that lead to change.
I also think a great thing to talk about is, since we are in a place of privilege at the university, is not just our obligation to advocate for our students and the well-being of them, but we need to advocate for the communities we exist in. So for example, U of I needs to worry about Moscow, we need to worry about Pullman and the region that we exist in, UW, Seattle, and that kind of thing. If institutions worry about not just themselves, but the communities they exist within, I think a lot can be done to both address issues on campus and off campus, and may get the dialogue started to address that.
Thank you. And I think too, as a public institution, we have an obligation to serve our community and serve our taxpayers. That's just as much as a constituency as we are as students. So it's honestly, it's just wonderful to see the work that you're doing, and I hope it amounts to positive change, and I know it has, at least in our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to be wrapping up. Are there any other questions? And are there any words that the panelists would like to leave us with today?
I actually would love to leave you guys with some words. I've said it before, but the issues of material hardship are not an issue of individualism. It is an issue of societal problems and systemic issues. It is a matter of social justice, it is a matter of equality, and it is a matter of giving people accessibility to higher education, to resources that benefit them, and to create a more equal world that we live in.
Well said.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for being on the panel, and thank you for coming. Got a few words from Kristen.
Either way. Is it working? Sounds like it's not, but thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to our panelists and to our moderator. Thanks to the Common Reading Program and the Center for Civic Engagement for partnering with us on this program. And the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation for sponsoring. Also the David G. Pollard Center for Arts and Humanities for sponsoring this program for our Market Outside. Really invite you to linger in the museum. The Art of Food exhibition is in the galleries. If you haven't seen that yet, it's part of the reason we're having this discussion in the museum today. And then outside, we have our pop-up community market starting now. It's probably been very tempting to you as you've been sitting here so nicely. We've got resources from campus, services from campus, also from the wider community, people tabling out there to tell you about some services that are available. We also have the mobile farm stand and other local growers with produce that you can take home for free. We will be there till about 3 o'clock, so tell your friends if you have time to come back and join us for some of that. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.